teachers.
Missing teachers. Remember, when the student is ready, the teacher appears? That's the truth. Okay. Next.
Faith.
Faith. That's religion. You have to have faith. Yoga, it's experience.
Life restraints.
Life restraints, okay.
Apathy.
Apathy. You know why apathy isn't quite that important? Some people think it is. You were the one that brought it up. Once you find out where you're going, nothing can hold you back. Once you get the first taste, everybody better get out of the way. Okay? What else? Competitive, this one? Competitive desires. Yeah, once you get a taste, nothing is as good. Next.
Assumptions.
Assumptions. Once you taste the truth, you'll be able to see it clearly everywhere. What else?
Fear.
These are the two big ones. Ego and fear.
Yeah.
Okay? So we just made it easy now. Then also, once you get a taste, this goes. This is one of the last ones to hang on. But eventually, when you find your beloved, is your ego going to stand in the way? Eventually, I don't care about what I need. This is what I found. You see? It makes a big difference. But you've got to get started. That's where it's tricky. Because so much, Swamiji did not quite bring up sin. Kind of touched on it a little bit.
Apathy.
Because he thinks it's nonsense. However, we were brought up in sin, right? So, you better believe it. Let's do it. Sin is all around us. Everyone's talking about sin. After Vatican II, they dropped it a little bit, but anyone who was born before Vatican II, sin is everywhere. That's the big thing. That's what's keeping us from God. That's what's punishing us. That's what's making us bad people as opposed to good people. So sin is a big one. Okay? That is why I think every once in a while we're given some great people on earth to teach us, yeah, but to kind of look at and say, who are these folks? What are they doing? What makes them so different from me? And then we get a little taste of where we're going. One of those was Swami Rama. I mean, Jaidev and I met him in 1972. We never, ever did anything else since except follow what he said, follow what he did, follow where he points. I mean, once you get a little taste, you won't do anything else. Impossible. Okay?
I'm curious, where did the concept of sin very first start?
From the story of Adam and Eve.
So it started with the Jewish tradition, way back at the beginning of the Jewish tradition.
But just about every religion has something like that. When you're doing opposite what is expected of you. The Jewish tradition, though, and the Catholics picked it up, which means all of Christianity, made it a really big deal. You disobeyed God.
Yeah, it is. We're so flawed that there's no way it can be fixed.
Right. That's one of the major differences between Christianity and yoga. Christianity says you're flawed, except that Jesus fixed it for you.
Except that we continue to be flawed because we have
Yeah, but
penance,
you can always.
you know.
Yeah, but you can always get yourself fixed again with the church.
But you can be a very good person. You can step out of the confessional, go to Mass, and at the high point of the Mass, they say, we're not worthy, but you can fix us. Well, I thought you were just fixed a few minutes ago, you know.
Well, they didn't know. The Mass was written, those are words, so they didn't know you just went to confession.
I know, but I
But
just...
the idea is there, that we are very flawed. In yoga, the idea is there that you are a perfect being. That's the difference between the two, okay? We used to say the churches give control over. The churches have control over us, over our souls, over our behavior, over our beliefs. Yoga says self-control. That's the difference. You have all the control over yourself. You are already a perfect being. Okay? They're real close, but that's one of the major changes. Understand?
You were saying when you get a taste of it, that's all that you'll do and you don't go back and all that. But it appears as though some people sometimes fall off that path.
Did they get a taste?
Didn't they?
I don't think
And
so.
they just didn't get beyond ego?
So I used to
or what?
ask Swamiji that. I said, Swamiji, all these people, blah, 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 blah. They learned to meditate. They were sitting in meditation with you, leading it, and how could they walk away? And he says, how do you know they were meditating? And I said, oh yeah, I don't know that they were meditating. Once you reach where you're going in meditation, you can never turn back. Okay? See the difference on it? We don't know what's inside people's heads. The great ones do. They could read us like a book. But okay? It's up to us what we do inside. Sure, we could know all the steps. We could pretend to practice them. But what's really going on inside? There's only one person that can handle that, and that's you. Okay? Well, one of the, Swamiji will talk about one person, and I'm talking about one person. If we have a little time, we'll sneak in a couple others. Huh? But I wanted to talk about Teresa of Avila with you because she was such a superb Catholic Christian, and she was such a superb yogi. And her whole life, she walked the tightrope between the two. Okay? She was born in Spain, Avila, Spain, in 1515. Okay? And she was one of 13 children. Her father was married first to a different woman, and she died after giving him 3 children, okay, a girl and 2 boys. So he married again, a 14-year-old. And she had 9 children. She died giving birth to her 10th child. Okay? And Teresa was the oldest girl in that second batch. Okay? She loved her father very, very much. She was supposedly very beautiful at the time. Or, different cultures think people are beautiful in a different way. But she was considered to be very beautiful. And so she had a big ego too, because she was always being praised. So that's one of the ways we build our ego. And it's a good thing because we have to know that we're important and that we're perfect. Then we can turn it around and say, I don't need this ego anymore. But first we have to build it up. So she lived, they were a little bit wealthy. Her father and his brothers, they ran woolen factories. And also they imported a lot of silk. And also all around the town were olive groves, etc. So she grew up with a lot of personal power. She knew she was good. I'm beautiful. My dad loves me. Mom likes me too. And I'm the oldest one in this part of the family, and I'm real smart, etc. Okay? So because they had a little bit more money, she was taught. Most of the women were not taught. So she devoured books. She just loved books. And one of her favorite books was reading about the knights. Okay? So all the knights who did this great thing, they'd go and they'd kill the dragon here, they'd go to this fort and they'd kill all the soldiers that were holding the princess, and they'd eliminate all the soldiers and free the princess. She thought this was just wonderful. And of course she all the people, all the knights that went off to free the Holy Land from the Turks, as Swami taught. Oh, they were wonderful. So she decided that life was too hard because it was boring. Life was too boring. Girls couldn't leave the property. And they had, houses with gates around it and a second set of big fences and walls and stuff. And the whole town of Avila itself has got walls and walls and walls. And the whole town is surrounded by this huge stone wall with turrets and all. So she thought, well, this is a little bit boring here. I'll never meet a knight if I'm stuck here. So I'm going to go meet some Moors. And, we're such sinners that if I live long, I have to either be a nun or I have to get married and have babies. Those are the only two options allowed for women, okay? The only two. And she says, plus it's so boring in here between all these walls. So she thought the best thing to do is go be a martyr, because then you don't have to live life. It's too long. Get killed immediately and go to God. Okay? Pretty easy. So she thought this all up when she was 6. So when she was 7, she thought, okay, we're leaving here. And she got her older brother, Rodrigo. He was 11. Rodrigo says, Teresa, I don't know if this is a good idea. She says, yes, you're doing it. And she had a way with people that they did whatever she wanted. So she was very good at that. She talked Rodrigo into going. She says, I've got lunch, I've got food, everything, we're going. So early in the morning, they snuck out. They got past the house, and their patio, and then the fruit tree area around the house, and past those walls. And he says, I'm hungry. She says, oh, I've got all our food. She takes out this little handkerchief that had a handful of raisins in it. Okay, that was their food for the journey. So they ate their raisins and walked further. They got outside the city gates. And they probably walked, some people say originally the story is exaggerated, but really probably about 1.5 miles. Okay? And this whole area of Castile is very dry, very, very dry. So not a lot of greenery around. Orangey, yellow dirt and lots of rocks and mountains. Okay? So they're walking, and every once in a while she'd say, Rodrigo, do you see any Moors yet? And he'd say, no, I don't see any. So then they'd start running to see if they can go a little faster, because she wanted to, they should be martyred. Well, almost up to the 2nd mile, her uncle comes along on a horse. He says, where are you going? And she says, well, we're going to be martyrs, So of course they're brought home, and that's the end of that. She couldn't be the knight she wanted to be, and she couldn't be a martyr. So instead, she decided she's going to build a community with her family members. Okay? And they're all going to be hermits, because she heard about the hermits. So she had all her brothers and sisters help her build hermitages in the garden. Okay? So under all the olive trees and the fruit trees, they're piling up all this stone, and of course she's in charge. And she's got all the hermitages there. And she taught them how to lead a monastic life. She even took off their fancy dresses and stuff, and no, you have to wear this because now you're a monk. Okay? So she did that for quite a while. Finally, when she turned 15, her mother died. She's the oldest girl with no mother, okay, and lots of little kids after her. So the family didn't exactly know what to do with her, because at that time you have to be taken into society with your mother or your grandmother, who was also dead, and men would come to visit and you're supposed to get married off. Well, she goes up to her dad and says, there is no way I'm going to get married. I'm not going to do it. I don't care if you sell me to anybody. I'm not going to do it. So Dad says, okay, we're sending her away to school. So he sent her away to a convent to go to school at 16. And that was the only ways that girls could get education, was to go to a convent. They had to act like nuns and live that whole life. So she did that. Because she said, there is such a thing in Avila, in all of Spain. It's called honor And we have the word, but we use it a little bit differently. When you say, she said, I almost lost my honor, meaning there was a man that had a crush on her, and he visited her a few times, but her mother wasn't present. That was enough to have the family lose its honor, the whole family. Okay? The fact that she argued with a man in public, namely this man, that would have the family lose its honor. So her father said, oh, thank goodness it happened just in our living room and in the garden, that kind of thing. So Dad was worried for the family. She was worried about hurting the family. So off to the convent. She said, she writes, Patrice has written several books, including one, her own life. She was ordered to do them. But she said when she went to the convent, all these young girls there, they used to walk around crying. And she says, why are you crying? Because I'm holy. So we're talking about assumptions. The assumption then was, when you look at a picture of Jesus, you're supposed to cry. Oh, I'm unworthy, you're so wonderful, and I'm this terrible person, and you cried. And Teresa couldn't understand that because she says, I refuse to cry. I'm not going to cry. Okay. So she got in trouble on that side. You were supposed, all of life was this fake coding. Okay? And she was being pulled to truth. So that was a problem for her from the very beginning. Okay? So of course, all the girls turned against her. She's this horrible person. Okay. She started to get very ill, probably from the food, being away from home, different air and stuff. Got very, very sick. And she kept fainting and having a very high fever. Nowadays, the doctors are trying to look through what could have happened to her, and they say hysteria. I don't think so, from what she was writing at the time. It wasn't hysteria. So something was going on, maybe some kind of food poisoning or whatever. But it's almost 2 years that she was very, very sick. So her dad pulls her out and sends her to another village where she's taking care of being healed. And the healing there, men and women both doing some of the healing in Spain at the time, they decided the best thing to do was to have her purge. Okay, so every day she has to do purgings, throwing up 3 times. And they give her all different kind of elements to make her throw up even more. So she's down to, she lost almost all her weight. She's this skinny little thing. She keeps fainting. And they say, oh, hysteria made her faint. But no, she didn't have any food, So after a year of that, she just keeps, she thought she would go to hell because that's what's being told at the time. Because you're not sitting up straight in Mass, because you're not crying when you pray, you're going to hell. The devil has your soul, okay? So she grew up with that one too. And because she thought she'd go to hell, her dad said, what do you want to do? She says, I'm going to a convent for sure. None of this, please take me away from these healers, just send me to a convent. I want to be a nun and I'll be holy. He says, over my dead body. So she figured, okay, I guess when Dad dies, we'll go. Instead, guess what she does?
Starts her own.
What'd she do with her brother? They snuck out. She snuck out, right. So, of course she was picked up again. Father brings her back and says, okay, you'll get what you want. This time I finally got it. So her brother Rodrigo, by this time, is a little bit older, and he's going off to be a conquistador to the Indies. Okay? So he gives all the money that he's supposed to inherit, he gives it out to Teresa. She's going off to the convent. She gives both of those to the next sister in line. Okay? And her father lets her go. So when she goes into this convent, it's what sort of was a Carmelite convent at the time. They were very different than they are now. And so she was brought in because she's upper class. She's given the suite of rooms. There's an upstairs with a spiral staircase coming down, and this is the place you have your friends come over for dinner. It's all in the convent. Each of the each of the wealthier women have got these suites. So she said things started to quiet down for her, and she wrote, everything about religious life delighted me. And the truth is that sometime when I was just sweeping the floor at a time of day when I used to be entertaining my boyfriends, putting on jewelry and indulging myself, She said, I realized now I'm free of all that. So I felt a great thrill. She said, but it surprised me because I couldn't understand where it came from. So every once in a while she'd get this fluttering inside and this thrill, I am so happy. But she couldn't understand why. Okay? There was a priest. Remember when she had to go to that city to get all the purgings? She was there like a year and a half. There was a priest in the town that he came to see her and tell her the devil was taking her and all that kind of stuff. Well, it turns out that priest was living with a mistress, and Swamiji's smiling because yes, it did happen a lot. Okay, so he was living with a mistress, had a couple of children, still say mass every day, and he also was a drunkard, and he drank very, very much. So he came to visit Teresa one day when she was in the convent. She says, Father, you're terrible. You can't go on this way because Jesus is not going to bless you anymore. So he says, how dare you talk to me? And she says, I dare. I dare? Because, she said, I want you to be healthy. What's that around your wrist? Well, the woman that I'm living with made me wear this. It was a copper bracelet. Okay? And she said, the woman put a spell on you. She has a lot of energy and she told you some things, and because you drink so much, you don't have your full mind, and so you're obeying her. Go take that copper bracelet and throw it in the river. He started to cry. He was so frightened. She said, go, now. He went and threw the copper bracelet in the river and came back to her. She says, now you're doing a retreat here, and I'll tell you what to do. So she told him what to do during the retreat. Of course, there's no drinking during the retreat. He comes out and he says, I feel so much different. I feel free. So she says, okay, don't go back to that town, go over here and live. You don't have long to live. He died within a year and was a saint when he died. Okay? He just started reading scripture, helping the poor. He never saw that woman again. Well, she sets up all kind of stories against Teresa, of course. That she took her boyfriend away. All you know how that's what public does. But 1 year later, he died. And when that happened, when people saw what he had become, that's when she became famous. Okay? So, then her dad died. She foretold his death also. Divided up everything. It went to court. Money. Anytime there's money, I'm telling you these things because the world doesn't let you go when you want to do your spiritual work. Someone here said there's too many things going on. She had to leave the convent to go back to her house because her sister's husband's brother-in-law or brother was fighting that he should have all the money of the family. So it went into this big law thing. And one of the things that she learned growing up was law. Her father loved her, remember? He gave her all these books to read, and she was very good with law and with mathematics. So she settled the account with lawyers, finally got the whole family settled, and then she came back. That was a whole year when she couldn't do spiritual work. She had to be working with her family again. So, she says, her new confessor came and told her that she has to pray a lot. So she's praying and doing all of this kind of stuff. And when she'd pray, something would happen to her so that she was pulled away somewhere else. Interiorly. Sometimes she would hear music. Sometimes she'd be pulled very deep inside. Didn't know quite what was going on. But she said, the world still intrigued me. Okay? The world intrigued me. So what happens is she has an experience at age 40. Up to that time, she's being a kind of normal nun, but with some gifts. She has an experience. She comes in, and there's a statue of the wounded Christ. And she just walks in and looks at it, and she bursts into tears. And she says something happened to her spirit, that she felt such peace inside that she's never felt. And she stood there for the longest time looking at the statue, feeling real different than she's ever felt before. Okay, so that was her taste. From that point on, she never turned back again. The difficulty in those days, as Swamiji mentioned, was the Inquisition was getting started, and it was big. You all have heard of the Inquisition? Okay. Well, Spain was hotbed of the Inquisition. So, because she became famous by helping that priest, kind of healing him and telling him when he's going to die and stuff, people knew about her and talked about her. So, of course, the Inquisition comes. What do you mean she could do X, Y, Z? I don't think she's a good person. So, women at that time were always very, very frightened. They could never speak out, as she did. They could not really hold degrees or anything like it. The nuns would do some learning within a convent, but most of them did not want to. So most of the nuns she lived with were uneducated. So if Teresa would do something a little bit unusual, they would report her. Okay? So one way the nuns found to get around it was to have confessors. You know, oh, know what a confessor is. There was no one in the convent that she could just talk to. You know, this morning I was deep in meditation and this image came to me. They'd report it to the Inquisition. So the only thing she could do is tell the priest who was coming for confession. So she'd doctor it a little bit. Father, I think I sinned this morning. What happened to my child? Well, you see, I was thinking and this image came to me of God. Ooh, here's a penance for you to do. Pray more. Okay? So at least she was able to talk to someone about it and find out what's going on with my mind. So one confessor after the other. Finally, she got a good one. But she was taught to pray mentally by making images of Christ. And also she was supposed to read books to bring up these images. Okay? What did Jesus look like? What did he say on this gospel? That kind of thing. So she said, now, as she was starting to do her meditation, they called it prayer. She said, I saw that God was within me. He was right there. And I was totally engulfed in him. She used an idea, or water, or fields, or flowers. She would just look at something and she'd feel God. Wrapped around her, inside of her. Okay? So we know that was different states of meditation she was going through, reaching into superconsciousness, just as we teach here. Okay? When she was going through that, the other nuns thought, she's nuts. Something happened. Because she would be, let's say, there's a famous story of her taking a frying pan and she's supposed to cook lunch for all the nuns. So she's shaking the frying pan and she goes into the state. Oh, she's pulled inside. God is here. So she's burning the sausages in the frying pan. Her hand is burning. It turns bright red. So the nuns pull it out of her hand and she's just standing there, you know, inside, very much inside. Swami Jaidev and I saw that happen to Swami Rama many times. Remember in his book, he says we were in New York City. Swamiji wanted to go to Gucci's store. And he's standing there, and I said, Swamiji, you want this orange color? And you like this color here? And he says, well, Tree, and he was that way for about 20 minutes. So Jaidev and I are trying to, you know, because the man that's selling the sweater, he thinks, what's going on? So we're saying, oh, well, he's just resting for a moment. Let's see this one in medium. Let's see it in large. So we were doing all this stuff to make up for Swamiji, who's in this altered state. Well, that's used to happen to her, okay? Except we were covering for Swamiji until he came out of it and we said, okay, Swamiji, let's go. Took him back to his hotel where he could be in some privacy. Well, for her, they decided that the devil took her. So it was the time that this is a sin that she's doing. If you meditate too much or if you pray too much, that's a big sin. God's going to punish you. Oh, the devil's got you because of this. So she was dealing with that constantly, back and forth, back and forth. Okay. She said, when this happens, the mind doesn't work at all. Does that sound like yoga? The mind stops working. She said, my will loves. My memory is almost empty. There's still something there. But my intellect stops functioning. It doesn't work. At the same time, it seems to be astonished at all the things it now understands. Okay? Same words that a yogi will use, but she doesn't know what to do with it. And she finally gets a confessor later on that is able to help her. So the Inquisition is now calling in nuns and priests, mostly women they called in. They even called in Queen Isabella. So Teresa is told by her confessors that she needs more confessors. She must not tell her experiences to anybody, but ordered write those down. I order you, write everything down. That's why there are so many books that she wrote, okay? She does. And she is ordered to do no spiritual work on her own because the Inquisition will get her. They were very smart about it, who they put as confessors to her too. So many confessors wanted to change her way of praying. Many tell her she's going the wrong way and she's going to be severely punished in hell. Okay? Finally, a great Jesuit comes. He's a lecturer that goes around the country, and he comes to their convent. And she says, may I speak to him? She has permission. And he says, you know what? What you're telling me that you've been going through, that just happened to me last week. You're doing fine. It's the first time it happened. So she is so excited about it, and after 1 week, he's transferred. Okay? Can't see her anymore. So after several years, she's on a one-day retreat of prayer, and at the end, she recites the Veni Creator Spiritus. Any of you ever heard? Veni Creator Spiritus. You probably heard that one. She says she was so overcome by a rapture. Suddenly, it almost lifted me out of myself. My body was there, but I was here with just part of me in it. She says, that was the first time the Lord has given me the gift of rapture, and I heard these words from Jesus. Now, child, I want you to speak not with men, but with angels. So he told her, don't listen to what your priests say anymore. Okay? So at that point, she gave up all her friendships. She gave up her connection to the family. She stopped seeing any guests that used to come. She stopped saying that she loved one person more than another because she said, I only fell very, very deeply in love with those who love God and are clearly trying to serve Him. Okay? So major change. Several superiors decided that now, because she wasn't such a major part of the community, she wasn't working with people so much, she may not receive Holy Communion. So that was cut off. She may not pray alone ever. And the superior said, you must do things now to distract your mind. And I order you to obey under your vow of obedience. Okay? So God's telling her to do one thing, and the superiors are telling her to do another thing. She was stuck for quite a while. And she used to obey. One priest came and ordered her to, whenever you get a vision, or whenever God speaks to you, as you say, and tells you to say something, you must snap your fingers. Tell it to go away. Snap your fingers, and if God speaks, spit. That's what she had to do for a long, long time. She's constantly warned of the devil leading her. And she writes down one day, you know, we exclaim, the devil, when we could be exclaiming, God, God, and make the devil tremble. She says, why don't they think of that? So you see, at the time, we're talking about what everyone else around us believes. It can be a major problem. I think you brought that one up. That could be a problem. Once she wrote, I'm more afraid of those who are scared of the devil than I am of the devil himself. In 1559, the Inquisitor General of Spain made a banned book list. And all the books that were on that list were burned in the square. Every one of them was one of her favorite books. That year, also an auto da fe, that's where they burning at the stake, was held in the next city. One condemned heretic was a man who earlier had a real interest in Teresa. Okay? So he goes before the committee, and in order to not be burned to death, he recanted and said, everyone I knew was horrible, everything I've ever said and read was horrible, and I'm sorry. So then he was just hung. He wasn't burned. Okay. That's what they did in those days. So, knowing that the Inquisition was on its way to find Teresa because she was connected with this man from years before, she had a private inquisition that was set up by her confessor, and then he would report to the Inquisition office. The confessor was the same man that confessed the heretic. So he said it was guilt by association. And he came to ask her the questions. Who visits you? Jesus. Who said it was Jesus Christ? He tells me himself. Who gave you that knowledge? God did. It just appeared in my mind. So the man's name was Alvarez. Alvarez comes back week after week after week with these questions for writing it all down, getting a volume to go take to the Inquisition office. Finally, one day, Alvarez has his own vision of Christ. Same thing. He comes rushing into the convent to tell Teresa. And she finally, and he says, now I'm going to stop all these weeks of investigation and interrogation. And he's so happy, he says, so you're at peace now. And she says, how do you know it was Christ? After she said that, they became fast friends for the rest of her life. They became very close friends, and he was her main confessor. Then she has a vision, which is a very famous one because you can't see it well. It's this one here. A vision of her. It was very, very strong. An angel came with a long arrow, a spear, with a golden tip on the end, and the tip was on fire. And she says the angel plunged it into her heart about 3 times. She said she, of course, felt it mentally, but physically she felt it. And she said it was right here in the middle of my chest. So what was happening? Heart chakra totally opening up, okay? And she said, and it felt like all my entrails were pulled out. And I loved it, okay? So it happened to her many times, and she would talk about this angel. Bernini made a statue of it in Rome. It doesn't exactly look like Teresa, but there it is, with her in ecstasy. And an ascetic visited her, Father Pedro of Alcantara, and they used to converse mentally after his visit over many, many years. So she did very much like Swami Rama used to call up his buddy yogis, across the continent, and they'd talk to each other that way. He would tell me about that, what they would say. And every once in a while I said, well, do you need to send a telegram? He said, why? Why waste paper? So she was doing that with this man, and she also predicted to him, she told him when he's going to lose his body, and she was right on the day. Right on. So, just about time, huh? What happened then was she had to go, God told her to start new convents and get away from these convents where they're not really following me. Okay. So the convent she was with was the calced Carmelites, meaning they wore shoes. She was supposed to start the discalced, no shoes. Okay? Which means that everything was brought to, the nuns used to wear jewelry and do all this weird stuff. All that was thrown out. And they went back to the original meaning of going inside to finding God within yourself. That's what the Carmelites are supposed to do. And she went around starting 13 convents in Spain. And then she really started walking the tightrope because she had to travel, usually by donkey and by cart. She did the traveling and through horrible weather. She wrote one time that Spain had 9 months of winter and 3 months of hell. So it sounds like Minnesota, doesn't it? And so she did all this work. It was incredible. I could talk for several hours about all the things she did and the different things that occurred to her from the spiritual side. But finally, when she finally, at age 67, one of the duchesses called her. See, because when you're starting up buildings, you have to work politically around money. She had to have property and materials to build these convents that God ordered her to build. Okay? So the Duchess says, you have to come to our city because my daughter-in-law is giving birth and I want you there when the child is born. This woman she is very, very sick, as she had been most of her life. But she travels there at 67 into Alba, so that's where she finally died. And she arrives, she's put to bed, and they're so surprised because the next day she gets up and she scolds some nuns. The prioress wasn't keeping the rules, so she talks to the prioress who's going to be let go. She sets up for the election of the new prioress. She visits some other nuns there. She makes arrangements for the new one, and after a few days, she totally collapses. She had vaginal hemorrhaging quite a bit. So the nuns are all walking on tiptoes because they know something's going to happen. The door is closed in her bedroom at night, and all this light is shining from under the door. This is before I looked up light bulbs. Okay. And they hear sounds, and every time she used to travel to these places, this is what would come up. So the next day she says, I'm going to die today. So she calls the sisters and she says, my dear ones, I want you to keep the rule. This is what God gave us for our rule. I want you to continually pray, never stop, and don't follow the example of this old bag nun. Do some good new things. It's very humble. So she died. They put her in a brand new habit, and the Duchess says, oh, we have to hide this body because someone's going to want to take this body. They're going to want this body in Avila. So they put her in a coffin, wooden coffin, and they stick her in one of the walls that separates the Duchess's house from the new convent built. And all bricked up, okay? They have a special ceremony and celebration and all, and people start talking about Teresa. So it's a year later, and Alvarez wants to see her body. He wasn't there when she died. Remember? He was a good friend and her confessor. So he comes and they start pulling out bricks. And of course all the bricks had fallen in and broken the casket. And there's mud and there's moss growing on the wood edges. But they pull it out. And they pull off this, and she was covered with a silk cloth. They pull the silk cloth off, and it looks like she's alive laying there. Okay? So this is to get Swami Jaidev. He can't understand how people could do this. But Alvarez says, oh, she's so beautiful. Take her habit off. We have to put a new habit on. Then he has the nerve to write down her breasts were very full. He's writing all this stuff out. She still had the most beautiful feet in Spain. I mean, just kind of nonsense stuff. But they redress her, but her body is perfect. And he chops off one arm. This is where Jaidev fainted when I told him. Chopped off the arm because, remember, the Catholic Church always ran about relics. Relics are big of holy people. And he said cutting through the skin was so easy. So then they pack her back up and put her away. The following year, someone else wants to see it. They pull her off, chop off the right hand to send to Rome. The third year, they pull it out. Oh, the body looks great. Take part of the 5. 5 times her coffin was opened and she was chopped up like this. Okay? And they sat her body up and they said, absolutely perfect. Nothing wrong with it. Okay? So I must say that I am very embarrassed because when I took my vows as a Catholic nun, we were given crosses to wear. And it was very important, made of silver, and they had little screws on to open it up. And inside was a relic of one of the great saints. I was wearing part of her bone. Okay. So for many years I wore Teresa of Avila's bones. Okay? But she started to do many, many miracles, and she was up for canonization, and the Inquisition came up and said, no, she's not a saint, the devil owns her. So it started again, but went right through the Inquisition had to go through the canonization process, and she was declared a saint. And in 1970, is that correct? 1970, she was declared a doctor of the church, meaning high intelligence, high, that whatever she taught will lead you to God. She was the first woman to be a doctor of the church. Okay, there are 3 now. The 2 Teresas and Catherine of Siena. All 3 are my patrons, which is interesting. Okay? But a very great woman. She didn't know where she was going because she didn't have, where's the teachers? You need to have the teachers. When she absolutely needed one, confessor would come. Or something else would happen. Okay? When you can't go any farther. Swami Rama used to tell us that we're taken care of all the time. All the time. But once she got that taste, she says there was no way. She couldn't refer to her family. She couldn't go into who's going to visit her tomorrow. It all had to be dropped because there's only one thing to look at. And she says, and that's the divine. Okay? Now, Swamiji has another one, a great mystic, that he will share with you. What's this?
Oh, don't tell him.
No, I won't tell him. It's your turn right now.
Interesting story about Teresa.
Yes.
Given the fact that she was had her convents around Spain, she had to inspect them occasionally, keep them up to par. And there's one day she was setting out in a storm, riding her burro. And as she came along, there was a snake suddenly darted out, and the burro backed and propelled her, and she landed in a puddle of water, drenched. She looked up and said, "It's no wonder you have so few friends." No, I have a few people I'll tell you about it now. There's a very interesting monk in the latter part of the beginning, rather, of the 15th century. He died in 1420. And I'm not going to tell you whether he's a monk in the East or the West, but I'm going to read you some things he said, and you tell me where you think he's from. Spirituality is not to be learned by flight from the world, by running away from things, or by turning solitary and going apart from the world. Rather, we learn in inner solitude wherever or with whomsoever we may be. We must learn to penetrate things and find the divine there. People shouldn't worry so much about what they do, but rather about what they are. If they and their ways are good, then their deeds are radiant. If you're righteous, then what you do will always be righteous. We should not think that holiness is based on what we do, but rather on what we are. For it is not our works which sanctify us, but we who sanctify our works. If I know myself as intimately as I ought, I should have perfect knowledge of all creatures. Who do you think said that?
Is that Meister Eckhart?
You gave it away.
Sorry.
When I heard it first, I thought it was Swami Rama.
Yeah,
Is it really?
that's Eckhart. One of my heroes. Quite a guy, Eckhart. Johannes Eckhart. Born in the 14th century. As a young man, he joined a monastic order that was less than 100 years old, or just about. They were called the Dominicans. And you'll see them today sometimes. After the name, they have OP. Doesn't mean old prudes, but just OP, an order of preachers. And he took to learning. They sent him to Paris. He so impressed the faculty there when he graduated, they wanted to make him a teacher immediately. So they let him be. But he had a certain characteristic. He wasn't afraid to try new things. And there was a certain freedom in those days, in the Middle Ages at that period, where you still could. And he was exceedingly devoted to both meditation and contemplation, both. And that's where he came up with some of this stuff. He got into a lot of trouble. Because one day he said, you have to go beyond God. Now, whoa, wait, now come on.
Yeah.
I mean, what's beyond God? He said, no, what you think is God. Gotta go beyond that. What the church thinks of God, gotta go beyond that. Oh, that got him, he got reported. So he used to say a lot of things like that. For example, listen to this one. To seek God by rituals is to get the ritual and lose God in the process. For he hides behind it. On the other hand, to seek God without artifice is to take him as he is. This guy is kind of, he's a maverick. So 3 years before his life ended, the archbishop, who was exceedingly jealous of him, who also belonged to the Franciscan order, and there was a mutual tension between the two, decided, not quite burn him at the stake, but take him to court, a church court. And he told his buddies, go find out in his writings and sermons. In those days, the leading lecturers would go to the church. And people would pile in because the sermon turned out to be a great seminar, always. So this is where we've got his sermons. Let's see what he said. And they're really lectures on, philosophy, psychology, theology, all kinds of things. So while he was investigated, they accused him of being a heretic and committing heresy. And he answered that very interesting. He said, whoa, wait a minute, guys. I resent being called a heretic because heretic has got to do with the intellect. Now, I could be wrong, but you're going to have to prove that. And I resent even more being accused of heresy because that's to do with the will. And I'm not against the church. I'm just against falsehood. Ooh. Needless to say, they wanted to press charges, so he pulled a fast one. He appealed to the Pope. And the Pope said, okay, come on to Rome once, slug it out there. On the way to Rome, he died. He caught pneumonia and died, traveling. The Pope was a whip. So the Pope, to satisfy the Franciscans, because they had more money and more power at that time, said, okay, he's a bad guy. He's really is. However, I'm just going to write this bull, B-U-L-L, bull and more than one meaning of the term. It meant really bulletin, as we call it today. And denouncing him for these 26 or some statements. However, he recanted. He said he was not trying to in any way offend us, and he apologizes if we find that he's wrong. He's willing to admit that he was in error. So therefore, we won't press him so hard. But what it did, it gave him a bad reputation. And his works went underground for about 2 more centuries, and then they show up some people like Henry Suso, Cloud of Unknowing, and a few other things. Boom, they start. But anyway, when I read his works and I saw how he was talking, he made a distinction between Godhead and God. He said God is what we create in our imaginations. Because you ask people, well, who is God to you? He says, that's fine. He says, that's the first level. But you have to go beyond that to get to the Godhead. And you can't do that while you're in your rational mind. You have to go to transcendence. So he hit upon it. No doubt he discovered some interesting things in his life. It makes it interesting. You can find him on the web. You can get the books today. And he's rather fascinating. Another closet yogi. Anyway, one more person I'd like to talk about. 2 more. One of his earlier monks, brothers, was a man called Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century was the Albert Einstein of philosophy and theology. There was nobody who could touch this guy. He was a genius. And he wrote a masterpiece called Summa Theologiae, the sum of all theology. And for him, theology encompassed the cosmos. So he would talk about astronomy, he'd talk about biology, talk about even plants in his theology. The man had an encyclopedic knowledge, and he taught between Paris and Rome most of the time. And his favorite philosopher just happened to be Aristotle, the Greek. And he wrote commentaries on all of Aristotle's major works. He was a prolific writer. He had a secretary by the name of Reginald. And Reginald knew how to write. And Thomas felt he had to write so much he invented his own shorthand. Thank God Reginald knew how to read it. So because of overwork and so on, he began to get ill. And because he's a priest and a monk, there's a distinction between the two, by the way. Each day he would say the Catholic Mass. He'd go to the little chapel in the monastery, and there he'd say it. So one morning in December, the famous Christmas episode, it wasn't Christmas, but it was around that time. While he's saying Mass, he goes into a trance state for many, many minutes. He's not breathing, his body's rigid. He is not completely there. And with great effort, he finally comes back. He refuses breakfast. He goes up to his room, and he just sits. Reginald pops in, okay, Tom, let's get going. We got so much, all these books to write. He doesn't stir. Are you all right, Father? He says to Reginald, Reginald, I can't write anymore. What? But he implores him, the good he's doing, and he's so popular in the crowds, they're dying for his next book and all this. But you haven't even finished that Summa yet, you just have a little part. He says, I can't write. Can you tell me why? He says, yeah. Everything I have written, given what I have seen this morning, is nothing but straw. He never wrote another word. He died 3 months later of longing. That's where he wanted to go. That was it. Unfortunately, we forget that. And I often get into arguments with Dominicans over the fact, remember what he said about all this theology? You guys, it's a marvel, it's a masterpiece, huh? But he said it was straw compared to what he had seen in that transcendental state. How come you guys aren't going there? Why do you get so caught up in this theology? It's great to get it going, but so that's him. One last person. He's one of my favorites too. We're going to Sweden. We're going to the 18th century when this country came about. And there we find a young man, one of 9 children, whose father just happened to be the Archbishop, the Lutheran Archbishop of Sweden. And little Emmanuel happened to be the brightest of the kids, so Dad was hoping he's going to follow in his footsteps and become a clergyman. But Junior had other ideas. Sorry, Dad, I like science. So he would go out and he'd collect things from the forest. He'd come home and he'd catalog them in his little way. Then he'd go and he'd study the stars at night. Everything was grist for his money. Everything. He was interested in hydraulics. He was interested in how ants build hills. He raised bees. He had an aviary. He would hunt animals. He'd notice the footprints. He'd follow everything he could. Then he got interested in math. And he pursued algebra. He read about Descartes and how he started, algebra and things like that. And he even went a step further. When he finished his schooling, he said, wow, there's so much to do in so little time. So he continued it. The family was well off. Didn't have to worry about money. And so he began to gather all the research from the field of chemistry, for example, after he took the course. And then he would synthesize it and come out with a new book which pulled out all the implications that they missed. He had that kind of a mind. He could take two different experiments, put them together, and see the implications that were hidden between the lines. Incredible mind. Then he'd walk over to physics and do the same thing. Then he'd walk over to mathematics and see what was going on. Then he was asked, would you like to run for office? Okay. He began to study law. And he became a representative in the parliament. And he began to change some of the social structures for the poor, to give them opportunities for pensions and things like that. He continued to write, and so when he was into his 30s, he had written over 150 books. And they were all different books on every science and art he could find. He wanted to meet Isaac Newton. That was his dream, his hero. So he gets to London, and he can't get outside because there's a big plague going on. So he jumps aboard, swims ashore. His fools then get past those Brits. And he gets into town, and he makes an appointment. He's so damn busy, he has no time. I mean, Isaac, for him, okay, well, I'm not going to waste my time here. He runs to every museum. And while he's studying all the collections, he goes to the local artistry, and they teach him glassware and silvercraft. So now he knows how to make beaded windows and things like that. And he brings home all kinds of compilations that he's gotten from the museums, and he sets up his own alphabet and his own ordering system when he gets home. The king, who happens to like the guy, says, hey, can you help me out? Would you become the assessor of mines? I'd love to. Okay, so now he's going in. I can't even say no. He now becomes the official inspector for the safety of mines, and he develops new shafts for them. He's a draftsman. He's learned all about that too. He improves the safety features for the miners, and they're very grateful. In the meantime, he invents a new type of hearing aid for hard of hearing. He also shows how to make a submarine. He got into all kinds of things, and lighter than air balloons. He was experimenting with them at the same time. So now he's 54, and I don't know what to do with my life. Written over 200 books now. And, he fell in love twice. But they saw where his interest is going, and they said, sorry, man, I'll be competing with that for the rest of my life. We're going to have to turn you down. Okay, so I'll marry science then. That's what he did. Whenever he'd go out, he'd have candy in his pockets because he loved kids, and he always feed them candy. So here he is, 54. He doesn't know what to do with his life. But if you look at the study of his books, something was happening. He was moving from the external, and he began to write more and closer to the human person till finally he was writing on anatomy. Then he began to study the glands. And to this day, medicine owns a great deal because he figured out things about the pineal gland that nobody knew about. And he studied the hormonal system, which is, we don't know much about it, but he was really a pioneer in that field too. The question hits him, what's the beginning of life? Oh boy, what a challenge for this guy, huh? He thinks it might be in the blood. So he does experiment. He says, no, that's too crass. Where could it be? Where could it be? He has a dream one night. Oh, by the way, he decides to start studying dreams. And he approaches it like he studies everything else. He puts down exactly all the wild times, with the women and the sex and all. He puts it all down. You can get his dream diary. It's an embarrassment to the organization today, but it's there. Because he wasn't afraid of anything. It's truth. Come on. And so he's struggling with this, what's the meaning of life? What am I going to do with myself? And the two converge in the dream. A Christ-like figure visits him in the dream. It says, Manuel, you've accomplished an awful lot. You've got almost a worldwide reputation. And now you're wondering what to do? Well, why don't you think beyond yourself for a change? Ooh, whoa, there's that ego. Huh? Why don't you consider going beyond yourself? Oh my God. And it hits him. Why don't I work for humanity, not just my own reputation anymore? Because he had all the royalties, he was wealthy. And at the same time he comes out, it hits him. I know where the secret of life is. It's in consciousness. Well, how do you get into consciousness? What's the laboratory? Your mind. Since he was a teenager, when he was bored in church, he used to practice breathing processes on his own. Talk about a closet yogi. So he starts to develop breath practices. Now here's what I did. I have to tell you something. Years ago, we got it in that room. I went to the organization that picked up where he left off, called the Swedenborg Community. And I spent a week, and they opened up all their archives to me of all his works. And I looked up everything he said about breathing. And I compiled it and wrote a whole article about his life and what he did with it. And then I made comparisons to yoga. He learned how to go beyond breathing. Swami Rama told me there is a stage you will reach when you can get the mind quiet and the breath so orderly and so fine that you can put a feather here, it will not move. You will no longer breathe with oxygen, although the body will stay alive, and this particular chakra will start pulsating. You're breathing pure prana now. He got to that level. When he did, he could transcend. And when he transcended, he met all his old cronies who had died. He used to have conversations with them and come back. Now, he changed his whole lifestyle. He said, I'm not out for a manual anymore. It hit him. Maybe there's some hidden significance in scriptures. So what he would do, he would take the various books of the Torah and the Christian scriptures, and through his investigations into consciousness every day that he'd go and spend sometimes hours, he'd come out and try to see the symbolism that was in scriptures that pointed to it. And he wrote a whole series of commentaries on the scriptures that way, which you could still get. He never told anybody he was doing this. Because when he released his commentaries in Swedish, the Swedish church got very upset. Who is this rabble-rouser? Who is this man, this maverick, saying these things? So, there was a price on his head. And because he wouldn't sign his name, not because he was afraid, he was fearless. But he said, I don't want the ego problems. So he was anonymous. And he took all the money and he gave it to the poor. He didn't need it. As the years went on, he was talked about in the parlors of the day, and the political offices. Who is this guy that's bringing out these magnificent books about how to meditate and so on? Of course, nobody meditated. And one day, he's at a party given by the mayor. The mayor had a special dinner, and all the bureaucrats were there, and their wives and so on, and he's sitting, and he's enjoying himself. The one thing I liked about him was the fact that he never turned down a dinner entertainment. Always accepted invitations. So, as a result, he's sitting there, and suddenly he goes, oh my God, the fire's getting closer. Oh, the houses are burning. People are being burned to death. They thought it was the vodka. Because 300 kilometers away in Stockholm was a raging fire. He was seeing the whole thing. And he was so captivated, he forgot about where he was. Because he was there. at the fire watching it. And he saw it working its way even to his house. He had houses in different cities. Now the mayor, who knew him, was a personal friend, told his secretary, take everything down, he says. Just write it out. Just don't tell anybody, just write it out. Everybody's having a good time drinking, they're a little high, so they're not paying much attention. They think he's just making up things. But the mayor knew better. And finally, he came out of it, and he was just sad. He said, oh, there's so many people. But the fire finally stopped, thank God. 2 days later, the town crier came through and reiterated everything he said. Now the secret was out. He's the writer. Oh boy. Immanuel Kant, the great German philosopher, sent a secretary up to investigate who is this man. As a consequence, the Lutheran Church filed a suit against him for heresy. You know, because it's the state religion, they could go to the state courts. So here you had a civil suit against a heretic. And the man just goes, oh my God, another challenge. Okay, here we go. I don't want a lawyer. I'll defend myself because I know all about law. For 5 years it ranged on. The judge listened to both sides. And finally the judge says, you know, I don't find any problem with this guy. I'm throwing it out of court. He walked out a free man. One day, a wealthy woman came to him and said, Mr. Swedenborg, I have a problem. I have a creditor that's coming after me, claiming that my husband didn't pay a bill on a large amount of silver pottery. I know he did, because he's always very prompt, but I can't find the bill to prove it, the invoice. And they're going to press charges and go to court if I don't. Do you suppose you could find out from my husband, who was deceased? Don't worry about it. Come back in 2 days. So that day, Manuel goes into meditation, takes off, meets Frank on the other side. Said, Frank, where's the damn bill? Huh? He says, tell my wife to go into the drawer in my bedroom. Behind the first drawer, there's a false back. Hit it. It'll open up. I put the invoice there. Thanks, Frank. Comes back. She comes over and says, man, here's what you do. Sure enough, there it was. One night he's playing cards. He loved to play cards. And there, you know, he's smoking along and drinking vodka and smoking. And the guy, as a young man, came in who was very cocky, and he'd heard about Swedenborg by now. So he starts goading him. Hey, how do I know you're such hot stuff? You know, who says you can do all these kinds of things? Who says you're the writer? How do I know you didn't copy it from him? If you're so good, why don't you tell me something that's going to happen to me in the future? You don't want to know. Oh yeah, big deal. Look at that. You're brushing it off. You're evading it. You're afraid to tell me, aren't you? Well, that was the wrong thing to say to him. He looked up and said, son, you're going to be dead in 24 hours. Card, please. The kid just sat there like this. 13 hours later, he was killed. He was run over by a carriage. Nobody ever challenged Swedenborg again. Hopefully. He had the gift. 1 year before 1774, was it? 76? He told his housekeeper, had a very cheery housekeeper, said, Madeline, 1 year from today, I want you to be around. I'm leaving this plane. I'm going up forever. No, you can't, sir. Well, just remember that. Okay. So a year later, it's the day of days. He says, Madeline, I'm going to take a bath today. Got to get ready. Puts out his brand new suit. Can you imagine this? Takes his bath, gets his hair combed, everything. Madeline, it's been a joy. I've made provisions for you. You have nothing to worry about. Here's what you do with my stuff. Give it to so-and-so and so-and-so. They'll take care of it. And I'm going to lie down in bed, and you come back in an hour. And you can call the funeral director. He laid down. Off he went. He never came back. How about that? If you read through his works, he uses a lot of metaphors. You see that he had stumbled upon pranayama practices that he used a lot. He He went to certain levels. He didn't go all the way, but he did go to certain levels, what I would call samadhi. But he didn't go all the way. At least, now I can't tell that from his writings. But he reached those realms where he was able to communicate with spirits, and he could come back. He also could cure, just by his presence. People just noticed how they would feel. Whenever he would travel, captains of the ship would fight to have him on their boat, because even if there was a storm, somehow their ship was always cruising faster, never got upset. One night a captain wanted to find out more about this, so he snuck around the outside and he looked through the portal, and there was Swedenborg in meditation, light radiating out of his body, like the way Teresa was at times. This happens. All that energy was just beaming out of the man's pores.
One thing I would just like to add, Stace,
Okay.
some of the things that, you've heard stories of great yogis. We talk about it all the time. And you'll see that many Christian saints do the same thing. That this is our nature. We really are perfect beings. And we forget it, and some of it, as we were talking about before, sometimes some of the teachers in Christianity make us not be perfect beings, but we are. And we know exactly where to go. The saints said go to God, the yogis say go to the divine self. It doesn't matter what you call it. We just have to practice. And one of the things that has happened is in the past, most of the great mystics were monks and nuns. I asked Swami Rama about that one time. Wait, I know he was more modern. So that's why I asked Swamiji about it. Why, Swamiji? He said, because you can't be having problems with health, housing, food in order to go to a mystic state. That's why usually the people were either monks or they were wealthy. They didn't have these everyday problems. He said that holds you back. So he says, you Americans, you don't know how lucky you are. You all have some housing, you have food enough. He said, get going. Okay? But don't sit around waiting, for the next life or something. Get started on it, okay? And once you get a taste, you will not turn back.
So we touched a little. You can see the variety. There's no such thing as a mystic clone. It's just your own awakening to the truth of life and following out that impulse. Falling in love with existence. Pursuing it on your own terms, at your own pace, and gradually becoming more and more self-sufficient in the knowledge of how divine you really are. So bon voyage.